The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital hummed their eternal song as Marcus Thompson pushed through the heavy double doors, shaking off the November rain that had soaked through his jacket during the short walk from the parking lot. At 34, he'd grown accustomed to the antiseptic smell, the constant beeping of monitors, and the hushed conversations that filled the corridors during night shifts. What he'd never gotten used to was leaving his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, with Mrs. Chen next door every time he had to work these ungodly hours. "You're late again, Thompson," called out Sandra, the charge nurse, though her tone carried more concern than criticism. She'd known Marcus since he started as a nursing assistant 3 years ago, right after his wife Jessica died in a car accident on I-95. Everyone at St. Mary's knew his story. The young father thrust into single parenthood, working double shifts to keep his daughter in a decent school district, studying for his RN certification whenever he could steal a few hours. Mrs. Chen's grandson had the flu, had to wait for her daughter to arrive, Marcus explained, quickly stowing his belongings in his locker. "What's the board looking like tonight?" Sandra handed him a clipboard, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Typical Friday chaos. MVA in Bay 3, possible stroke in 7, and we've got a new admit in room 412. Elderly woman, stage 4 lung cancer. Came in through the ER this afternoon with pneumonia. No family listed on her intake forms." She paused, her expression softening. "Dr. Patel wants someone checking on her every hour. She's fragile, Marcus. Not just physically." Marcus nodded, scanning the patient information. Eleanor Whitmore, 73 years old, former high school English teacher. No emergency contacts. No visitors logged. The words painted a picture he'd seen too many times before. Another person facing their final chapter alone in a city of millions. The first few hours of his shift passed in the usual blur of activity. Marcus checked vitals, administered medications, helped a confused elderly man find his way back to bed, and comforted a teenager who'd broken her arm skateboarding in Central Park. But throughout it all, his mind kept drifting to room 412 and the woman who had no one. At 11 p.m., during a brief lull, Marcus made his way to Eleanor's room. The door was slightly ajar, and soft light spilled into the hallway. He knocked gently before entering, finding her propped up on pillows, her silver hair spread across the white linens like moonlight. Despite the oxygen cannula and the IV lines snaking from her thin arms, there was something regal about her bearing. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm Marcus, one of the nursing assistants. Just checking in to see how you're doing." Eleanor's pale blue eyes focused on him with surprising clarity. "You don't have to pretend you're here for medical reasons, young man. I heard the nurses talking. They're worried the old lady might kick the bucket without anyone noticing." Her voice was raspy, but held traces of humor. "I appreciate the honesty of medical charts. No family, at least it's truthful." Marcus pulled up a chair beside her bed, something he technically wasn't supposed to do when he had other patients waiting. "How's your breathing? Any pain?" "Always pain," she said matter-of-factly. "But you get used to it, like you get used to everything else. The loneliness, the silence, the realization that you've outlived everyone who ever mattered." She studied his face. "You have kind eyes, sad, but kind. You've lost someone." The observation caught Marcus off guard. "My wife, 3 years ago, and now you're raising a child alone." It wasn't a question. "I can always tell. There's a particular exhaustion that comes with loving someone so much that you'd sacrifice everything, including sleep." She smiled weakly. "I was a teacher for 42 years. You develop a sense for these things." They talked for 20 minutes, well beyond the standard check-in. Eleanor told him about her classroom at Washington Irving High School, about the students whose lives she'd touched, about the husband she'd lost to Korea and the son who died of AIDS in the 80s. "I thought I'd have grandchildren by now," she said quietly, staring at her hands. "Thought I'd be surrounded by life instead of this." When Marcus finally stood to leave, Eleanor's thin fingers caught his wrist. "Will you come back?" Tomorrow, I mean. During your next shift. I'll be here tonight, Mrs. Whitmore. I work until 7 a.m. Eleanor, she corrected. And I meant, will you visit? Not just check my vitals and mark your chart. Will you actually visit? Marcus looked at this woman who'd spent a lifetime giving to others, now reduced to asking a stranger for companionship. He thought of Emma, of how she'd feel if he ever ended up alone in a hospital bed. Yes, Eleanor, I'll visit. Her grip relaxed, and something like relief crossed her features. Thank you, Marcus. You have no idea what that means. But he did know. In the 3 years since Jessica's death, he'd learned exactly how much a simple act of presence could mean. As he returned to his rounds, checking on the MVA patient and adjusting pain medication for the stroke victim, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Eleanor's grateful expression. At 3 a.m., he returned to room 412 with a cup of lukewarm tea from the staff lounge. Eleanor was awake, staring at the dark window that reflected only the hospital room back at her. Couldn't sleep? Marcus asked, handing her the tea. Haven't slept properly in months, she admitted. Pain, yes, but also fear, I suppose. Fear of closing my eyes and not waking up. Fear of dying alone in the dark. She sipped the tea gratefully. This is terrible, by the way. Hospital tea always is. Marcus laughed, the sound surprising them both. Sorry. Budget cuts mean we can't afford the good stuff. They fell into easy conversation, Eleanor asking about Emma, what she liked to read, what made her laugh, whether she missed her mother. Marcus found himself sharing things he rarely discussed. The guilt of working so much, the fear of not being enough, the exhaustion of trying to be both parents. You're doing better than you think, Eleanor said firmly, her teacher's voice emerging. The fact that you worry about it means you care. That's more than many children get from two parents. As dawn began to lighten the sky beyond the window, Marcus realized he'd spent nearly 2 hours in room 412, far more than his duties required. Yet somehow his other patients had been fine, and this conversation had filled something in him he hadn't realized was empty. I should let you rest, he said reluctantly. Eleanor reached for his hand again, her grip surprisingly strong. Marcus, I need to tell you something. The doctors, they've given me 2 weeks, maybe 3. I've decided not to pursue aggressive treatment. At my age, with my condition, it would only prolong suffering without adding life. She paused, gathering courage. I have no one, no family, no close friends left. Everyone's gone or moved away or forgotten me, but tonight, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Thank you for that gift. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I'll be back tonight, Eleanor. That's a promise. As he gathered his things at the end of his shift, Sandra caught his arm. I saw you spending time with the patient in 412. That was good of you, Marcus. Nobody should face the end alone. Driving home through the early morning traffic, past the bodega on the corner opening its shutters and the joggers starting their day in Riverside Park, Marcus thought about loneliness, about connection, about how sometimes the most important care you could provide had nothing to do with medicine. When he picked up Emma from Mrs. Chen's apartment, she immediately wrapped her arms around his waist. Daddy, you smell like hospital. Sorry, sweetheart. Long night. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Hey, Emma, have you ever thought about what makes someone family? She considered this with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could muster. People who love you and don't leave you? Yeah, Marcus said softly, thinking of Eleanor waiting in room 412. Yeah, that sounds about right. The afternoon sun cut through Emma's bedroom window as Marcus tried to convince his daughter that green vegetables weren't actually poisonous. She'd inherited her mother's stubborn streak and her father's negotiating skills, a combination that made dinner times a battle of wills. 3 bites of broccoli, Em. That's all I'm asking. 2 bites and you read me an extra story tonight, Emma countered, her dark eyes sparkling with mischief. Marcus couldn't help but smile. Deal. But we've got to finish up. I have to head to work soon, and Mrs. Chen is making dinner for you. Again? Emma's face fell. Can't I come with you? I'll be quiet. I can do my homework in the waiting room. You know that's not allowed, sweetheart. Hospital rules. He tousled her hair. But I promise, tomorrow we'll do something special. Just you and me. Maybe the Natural History Museum. You've been wanting to see the dinosaurs again. This seemed to appease her, and after the obligatory 2 bites of broccoli, Marcus walked her next door to Mrs. Chen's apartment. The elderly Chinese woman had become their unofficial family since Jessica died, refusing payment but always accepting Emma's crayon drawings and Marcus's offers to help with heavy lifting. "You look tired, Marcus," Mrs. Chen observed in her gentle accent, taking Emma's backpack. "Working too much." "Bills don't pay themselves," he replied, the standard excuse that never quite captured the whole truth. Yes, he needed the money. Medical debt from Jessica's accident still haunted their finances, but lately he'd been thinking about Eleanor Whitmore and the promise he'd made. For the past week, he'd been visiting room 412 during every shift, spending his breaks and lunch hours sitting with the elderly woman who had no one else. When Marcus arrived at St. Mary's that evening, Sandra was waiting at the nurse's station with a concerned expression. "She asked for you 3 times already, refused her dinner until someone promised you were coming in tonight. How is she?" "Declining. Dr. Patel says maybe a week now, possibly less." "The pneumonia isn't responding as well as we'd hoped." Sandra touched his arm. "Marcus, you've been wonderful with her, but prepare yourself, okay? These situations, they take a toll." Marcus nodded. But as he made his way to room 412, he realized he was already past the point of professional distance. Over the past week, Eleanor had become more than a patient. She'd become a friend, a confidant, someone who listened to his fears about raising Emma alone and shared stories about her decades in the classroom that made him laugh, despite the somber setting. "There you are," Eleanor said when he entered, her voice noticeably weaker than the previous night. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned me." "Never," Marcus said, pulling up his usual chair. "I promised, didn't I? People break promises every day." But she smiled as she said it, reaching for the glass of water on her bedside table. Her hands shook so badly that Marcus had to help her, holding the cup steady while she sipped through the straw. They fell into their routine, Marcus checking her vitals, while Eleanor questioned him about Emma, about whether he'd remembered to buy more milk. He had. Whether he'd scheduled the parent-teacher conference. He hadn't. Whether he was taking care of himself. Debatable. It was oddly comfortable, this dying woman mothering the motherless father. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said during a quiet moment, "about legacy, what we leave behind." She gestured to the empty room, bare of personal items except for a small bag of clothes someone had retrieved from her apartment. "I spent 42 years teaching, Marcus. Thousands of students passed through my classroom. I taught them about Shakespeare and Dickens, about metaphor and theme. But I can't tell you where most of them are now, or if I made any real difference." "Of course you made a difference," Marcus protested. "Did I? Or did I just fill their heads with information they've long since forgotten?" She turned to look at him, her pale eyes intense despite her failing body. "What's the point of a life if in the end you die alone in a hospital room with no one to remember you?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "My wife Jessica used to say that we touch people in ways we never know about, like ripples in water. You throw a stone, and the ripples keep going long after the stone has sunk. Maybe one of your students became a writer because of something you taught them. Maybe another learned to love reading and passed that love to their kids. You can't see all the ripples, Eleanor, but that doesn't mean they're not there." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "You're wise beyond your years, Marcus Thompson." "Nah, I just pay attention to smart people." He squeezed her hand gently. "You're not forgotten, Eleanor. I'm here. And I'm going to keep being here." "But why?" she asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "You have your own life, your own troubles. Why waste your precious time with a dying old woman?" Marcus thought about how to answer that. "Because when Jessica died, I was surrounded by people for about 2 weeks. Then everyone went back to their lives. And I was alone with a 4-year-old and no idea how to survive. Mrs. Chen, our neighbor, she showed up one day with soup. Didn't ask permission, didn't wait for an invitation, just kept showing up. He paused. You taught for 42 years, Eleanor. You spent your life showing up for other people. Someone should show up for you. A tear rolled down Eleanor's weathered cheek. I wish I'd had children like you. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. Eleanor wanted to hear about Emma's latest scheme to avoid vegetables, about the other patients on the floor, about anything normal and alive. Around midnight, she asked Marcus to read to her. There's a library cart that comes around, she explained. I borrowed a collection of short stories. Would you... I know it's not part of your job, but I'd be happy to, Marcus interrupted, locating the book on her bedside table. He read for an hour, his voice filling the quiet room with stories of distant places and different times. Eleanor closed her eyes, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. Her fingers tapped along with the rhythm of certain phrases, the teacher in her still analyzing prose even now. When he finally stopped, she opened her eyes. You have a good reading voice. Do you read to Emma every night? When I'm not working. It was something Jessica and I always did together. The memory still hurt, but less than it used to. It's one of the few things I feel like I'm definitely doing right. You're doing a lot right, Marcus. More than you know. Over the next few nights, this became their pattern. Marcus would arrive, check on his other patients, then spend his breaks with Eleanor. They talked about everything and nothing, her memories of teaching during the civil rights movement, his fears about Emma growing up without a mother, the books they'd loved, the regrets they carried. I should have traveled more, Eleanor confessed one night. Always thought there'd be time. After retirement, I told myself, after I saved more money. But then you wake up and you're 73 and alone and dying, and you never made it to Paris. Where else did you want to go? Marcus asked. Eleanor's face brightened, despite her exhaustion. Ireland, to see where my grandparents came from. Japan, to see the cherry blossoms. The Grand Canyon. Can you believe I've lived in America my entire life and never saw the Grand Canyon? She laughed, a sound that turned into a cough. Silly, isn't it? To spend your whole life preparing to live and then realize you forgot to actually do it. It's not silly, Marcus said quietly. I think a lot of us do that. Get so caught up in the day-to-day that we forget about the bigger picture. Don't make my mistakes, Marcus. Don't wait. If you want to take Emma somewhere special, do it. If there's something you've always wanted to try it. Life is shorter than you think, and regret is a terrible companion in your final days. That week, Eleanor's condition deteriorated noticeably. She slept more, ate less, and her lucid moments became shorter. But she always seemed to wake up when Marcus arrived, as if she'd been waiting for him. On Thursday night, Sandra pulled Marcus aside before his shift. Her oxygen saturation is dropping. Dr. Patel says it could be any day now. She's been asking for you specifically, Marcus. Says you're her emergency contact now. Sandra showed him the updated patient form, where Eleanor had listed his name and number. I know this is unusual, but she doesn't have anyone else. Are you okay with this? Marcus stared at the form, at his name written in Eleanor's shaky handwriting under person to notify in case of death. Something heavy settled in his chest. Not regret exactly, but the weight of what he'd taken on. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I'm okay with it. That night, Eleanor was more alert than she'd been in days. I need to tell you something, she said when Marcus sat down. I've arranged everything. The funeral home, the cremation, it's all paid for. But I wanted you to know, in my will, what little I have is going to you and Emma. Eleanor, you don't have to. Hush, let an old woman finish. She fixed him with a stern look, the teacher commanding her classroom one last time. It's not much. Some savings, the proceeds from selling my apartment, maybe 30,000 after everything's settled. I want it to go toward Emma's education. And Marcus? She gripped his hand. I want you to take her somewhere. Anywhere. Take a vacation, see the Grand Canyon, visit Disney World, whatever. Just don't make my mistake of waiting for some day." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll live, Marcus, for both of us. Say you'll grab life with both hands and make every moment count." Eleanor's breathing was labored now, each word an effort. "And say you'll tell Emma about me. Tell her about the lonely old teacher who met a kind man at the end of her life. Tell her that sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about showing up." "I promise," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. Eleanor smiled, peaceful for the first time since he'd met her. "Good. That's good." She closed her eyes, exhausted from the conversation. "Stay a while. I sleep better when you're here." "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus assured her. And he didn't. That night, he sat vigil in room 412, holding the hand of a woman who'd become family in the space of 2 weeks. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, but in this small room, time seemed to slow, allowing for one last gift, the gift of not dying alone. Marcus was changing the linens in room 318 when his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed St. Mary's main line, never a good sign during his day off, his hands stilled on the crisp white sheets. Marcus Thompson. "Marcus, it's Sandra. Eleanor asked for you. You should come." He was out the door in 3 minutes, calling Mrs. Chen from his car. The Tuesday afternoon traffic on Amsterdam Avenue crawled, every red light feeling like an eternity. His mind raced through the conversations of the past 3 weeks. Eleanor's words about regret and living fully echoing in his head. By the time he reached room 412, Dr. Patel was adjusting Eleanor's morphine drip. The elderly woman's breathing had changed, shallow, irregular, the distinctive pattern Marcus had learned to recognize during his years at the hospital. "She's been asking for you since this morning," the doctor said quietly. "I'd say hours, not days." Marcus nodded, unable to speak, and took his usual seat beside the bed. Eleanor's eyes opened, cloudy but still aware. "You came," she whispered. "Always," Marcus replied, taking her frail hand in his. "Emma? Mrs. Chen has her. She's making dinner, probably trying to convince Em that dumplings count as vegetables." Eleanor's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Smart girl. You're Emma. She'll do great things." They sat in silence for a while, Marcus occasionally adjusting her pillow or moistening her lips with a sponge. The afternoon light shifted across the room, painting geometric patterns on the linoleum floor. "Marcus?" Eleanor's voice was barely audible now. "I'm here. Thank you for not letting me be alone, for showing up when no one else." "You don't have to thank me, Eleanor." "Yes, I do." Each word required tremendous effort. "You gave me something precious, someone to matter to at the end. That's everything." Marcus felt hot tears slide down his face. "You matter, Eleanor. You've always mattered." Her fingers squeezed his hand weakly. "Tell Emma about kindness, about how one person sees showing upness can change everything." "I will. I promise." Eleanor's breathing became more labored, longer pauses between each breath. Marcus had seen this before, knew what it meant. He held her hand tighter, leaning close so she could hear him. "You're not alone, Eleanor. I'm right here. I'm not leaving." Her eyes found his one last time, filled with gratitude and peace. "Good man, good father, good son." The last word broke something in Marcus. Son. In 3 weeks, this dying stranger had become family, had seen him, valued him, loved him in a way that transcended blood relation. "Rest now," he whispered. "It's okay. You can rest." Eleanor Whitmore took 3 more breaths, each one softer than the last, and then she was still. The monitor's steady beep flatlined into a single, continuous tone. Dr. Patel entered quietly, checked for vital signs, and noted the time of death. 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. "I'm sorry, Marcus," Sandra said, appearing at his shoulder. "I know you two became close." Marcus sat with Eleanor for another 30 minutes after they turned off the machines, unwilling to leave her just yet. He thought about their conversations, about the wisdom she'd shared, about how this woman who'd thought she'd left no legacy had profoundly changed his life in just 3 weeks. Finally, he stood, kissed Eleanor's forehead gently, and walked out of room 412 for the last time. The following week passed in a blur. Marcus handled the funeral arrangements, true to his role as her emergency contact. The service was small, just Marcus, Sandra, Dr. Patel, and 2 elderly women who'd been Eleanor's colleagues decades ago and read about her death in the obituary Marcus had placed. "She was the best teacher I ever worked with," one of them said, a woman named Margaret with white hair and kind eyes. "Lost touch after I moved to Florida. I didn't know she'd ended up alone." "She wasn't alone at the end," Marcus said firmly. "She had people who cared about her." After the cremation, Marcus took Eleanor's ashes to Riverside Park, to a bench overlooking the Hudson River, where she'd told him she used to sit and grade papers on spring afternoons. He scattered them there, watching the grey powder catch the wind and drift out over the water, ripples spreading from a single point. 3 months later, the estate lawyer called. Eleanor's apartment had sold, and after all expenses, there was $32,000 designated for Emma's education fund and life experiences for the Thompson family. That spring break, Marcus took Emma on their first real vacation since Jessica died. They flew to Arizona, stayed in a modest hotel, and spent 2 days at the Grand Canyon. Emma was entranced by the immense chasm, asking a million questions about geology and time, and how something so big could exist. "Why did you decide to come here, Daddy?" she asked on their last evening, as they watched the sunset paint the canyon walls in impossible shades of orange and red. Marcus thought about Eleanor, about her regrets, and her gift. "Someone I knew always wanted to see this. Someone important who couldn't make it, so I thought we'd see it for her." "Was it Mommy?" "No, sweetheart. Someone else. A friend who taught me that we shouldn't wait to do the important things." Emma considered this, swinging her legs from the bench where they sat. "I'm glad we came. It's really pretty." "Me too, Em. Me too." Back home, life returned to its familiar rhythm. But something had fundamentally shifted. Marcus found himself saying yes more. Yes to impromptu ice cream trips. Yes to bedtime stories even when he was exhausted. Yes to playing one more game of cards before sleep. He took Emma to the park more, worked 1 less double shift per month, and started putting money in a travel fund for future adventures. He also started volunteering at St. Mary's beyond his regular shifts, spending time with patients who had no visitors. Once a week, he'd make rounds with a book, offering to read to anyone who wanted company. The hospital administration eventually recognized the program, formalizing it as Eleanor's Hours, time dedicated to ensuring no patient faced illness alone. Sandra noticed the change immediately. "You're different," she said one night during a quiet moment at the nurse's station. "Lighter somehow." "Eleanor taught me something," Marcus replied, watching the floor's activities swirl around them. "She spent her whole life teaching, touching hundreds of lives, but couldn't see her own impact. She thought she'd be forgotten." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But she changed me, changed how I approach every day, how I prioritize time with Emma, how I see my work here. That's legacy. That's what remains." "She'd be proud of you." "I hope so." 2 years later, Marcus finished his RN certification, funded partly by Eleanor's gift and partly by his relentless determination. At the graduation ceremony, Emma sat in the front row, wearing her best dress, holding a sign that read, "My dad is a nurse," with a drawing of a stethoscope. As Marcus crossed the stage to receive his diploma, he thought about the journey that had brought him here, Jessica's death, the struggle of single parenthood, the night shifts that blurred together, and one dying teacher who'd reminded him what truly mattered. That evening, back in their small apartment, Emma asked to hear the story again. It had become one of her favorites, the tale of Eleanor Whitmore, the lonely teacher who'd befriended her father. "Tell me the part about what she said at the end," Emma requested, curled up against Marcus on the couch. She said that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about showing up, about being there when someone needs you, even if they're a stranger. And you showed up for her. I did. Good. Emma yawned, fighting sleep. I would have done that too. Marcus kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. I know you would have, sweetheart. You've got a good heart. Later that night, after putting Emma to bed, Marcus stood at his apartment window, looking out at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there were Eleanor's former students, living their lives, probably unaware of how their teacher had spent her final days. But maybe one of them had become a writer because Eleanor encouraged them. Maybe another had learned to love literature because of her passion. Maybe her influence rippled outward in ways no one could trace. And now her influence continued through him, through the patients he'd spend extra time with, through the life lessons he'd share with Emma, through the reminder to grab life firmly and not wait for someday. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. Emma left her stuffed rabbit here, bringing it over tomorrow. Sleep well. He smiled, grateful for this woman who'd shown up for them when they needed it most, continuing the chain of kindness that Eleanor had taught him to recognize and perpetuate. Before bed, Marcus pulled out a box from his closet, items he'd saved from Eleanor's hospital room, a book of short stories they'd read together, the note she'd written updating her emergency contact, a photo he'd found in her apartment of a young Eleanor in front of her classroom, eyes bright with hope and purpose. He set the photo on his dresser, adding it to the family gallery that included pictures of Jessica and Emma. Because Eleanor had been right. Family wasn't just about blood. It was about showing up, about caring, about making someone matter in a world that too often overlooks the lonely. Thank you, Eleanor, Marcus whispered into the quiet apartment, for reminding me how to live. Outside, the city continued its eternal rhythm, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, lives intersecting in unexpected ways, strangers becoming family through simple acts of kindness. And in a small apartment on the Upper West Side, a single father and his daughter slept peacefully, carrying forward the legacy of a teacher who'd thought she'd leave nothing behind, but had in fact changed everything. The ripples continued, spreading outward into the world, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen. Proof that we all matter, that our connections endure, and that showing up for someone, even a stranger, even at the end, can create meaning that echoes far beyond a single moment, a single room, a single goodbye.